I think this colloquium series is really a great event where, we can talk about ideas and share some thoughts, talk about some research we're doing, and it's a time for us to perhaps to exchange our thoughts, because I think from my perspective, I just don't want to lecture to you for 30 minutes or so. I really do want this to be a dialogue and a conversation. I picked this topic, this fast-forward 21st century, but then I thought, oh my God, what was I thinking? Because this is a really broad topic. So what I'm going to do is just list out a few trends that I see in libraries in the country and in the world, how it affects us as library professionals and as archival professionals, and then just have a sort of a dialogue with you about some of those changes. Now, some of the work I'm doing recently has to do with justifying the existence of libraries and the relevance of libraries. I've been having meetings with deans on campus and with the provost about, so what is the library really about? And these are just two quotes that sometimes I use just to show that, hey, maybe in 1924, Stephen Leacock thought libraries were important. And certainly in the 21st century, libraries are even more important. They are an integral part of our campus, but also of society and of communities. So the title of my speech, as I said, was Fast Forward, which I think reflects what we all know, that the world is changing just so rapidly, and information is really worldwide. And also what's interesting is how information-seeking behavior is changing as a result of new technologies, for example. And so that raises an interesting question. Do libraries change user behavior, or does user behavior change libraries? And I'm not going to debate that question with you today, but I think probably both. I think that the users and libraries are intimately connected with each other, and we influence what each of us do. So with all these changes in the information world, many sort of think that this is quite cataclysmic for libraries. And there is this article that Gutcher wrote when he talks about seismic shifts in technology and social organization. And librarians and libraries are facing changing roles. And I think that some people can see that perhaps we're rejecting some of our traditional values and services that we provide. But I think it's more a reflection of the changing needs of our users and how we respond to that. We are rethinking and we're updating our services to stay relevant as leaders in providing access to information. I really think that's the bottom line. And to do that, libraries are forming strong networks, not only amongst libraries, in between libraries, but also with other types of organizations. And all of that exposes more of how people do things, how organizations work. And I think libraries can learn a lot from meeting and networking and connecting with others who are doing similar things, but perhaps not even quite the same, but still that there is this sharing of best practices and sharing of knowledge. In 1938, I wasn't here then, but in 1938, the Friends of the UBC Library donated $900 to purchase a set of volumes, you probably know this, Edward Curtis, called Indians of North America. And today, maybe that $900 will pay for one subscription to a newspaper. That same volume now costs about $10,000 on the market. And as you know, just historically speaking, we used to rely just on paper, print material. We moved to audiovisual, to microforms, to CD-ROMs, and now we're into this age of, things can come out on the screen and we have to collect it, or we digitize information. We are truly in an era of digital developments, and they will only grow. I think we need to be ready to face them and meet that challenge. So as when I graduated from library school, as I call it, we studied the core services of a library. And I remember there was a course on technology, but it was only an elective. You didn't even have to take it. in those days. Today, I'm sure that it's totally different, but still, I think the fundamentals of our profession, the services and the values that we offer, haven't changed. And whether you call it cataloging or whether you call it resource description and access, we are still dealing with the same issues of organizing information and providing access for our users. So I don't think there has been a seismic shift at all in terms of what we are all about, but how we deliver services has changed so tremendously. And so in terms of trends, I'd just like to talk to you a bit about some trends I've noticed because of all these changes that are taking place. And the first one relates to sort of new careers and new titles, both within libraries and outside libraries. And Douglas Copeland, we've just acquired his papers, by the way. We're really happy to have them. He talked about this information overload and how it's triggered a crisis in how people see their lives. And I think it's very true. And so how do we react to that change in terms of the way information is speeding everything up? There's still a need for librarians, even if the user has direct access to those social media tools and Google and all that. And in some reports I was reading, librarianship is one of the best careers. It was voted one of the best careers to take in I think 2009. There are library jobs opening up in non-traditional library settings. We can think about things like database design and interface, information management, data curation. All these things are opening up, may not be just in libraries, they could be in other organizations as well, but that skill is still needed. It's been said that the web doubles every 30 days. I mean, it's just incredible. And when I lived out east in Ottawa, I had occasion to speak to some of the heads of the high-tech industry, and one of them is Tom Jenkins. He's the chairman of Open Text, and he's a very good friend of Jim Balsillie of RIM Technologies. And Tom was telling me that, you know, he said, Ingrid, it's the age of the revenge of the librarian, he said, because the skills that we have as librarians are so needed in organizing information today. And so I asked him whether he's got jobs for librarians, and he said, sure. You know, I think he'd be very happy to have librarians work in his organization. So there are these new jobs, the data curation I mentioned, the metadata librarian. I was speaking to some ARL heads of libraries just recently, and one of them in Hawaii said that she's just staffing something called Emerging Technologies Librarian position. And there's another one called Innovation Librarian position. We're being very creative in the types of skills we're asking for and the types of positions that we are offering to the graduates. So I think there is a lot of potential there and a lot of opportunity for using what we learn out in the workforce. And just another sort of thought about how much the idea of multitasking and new social media tools, how much we have to use at the same time. There's also this statistic that I found about how often we receive emails per week, and the executive 300 emails per day, and I can say that's probably true. So there's a lot more that we do in terms of not just getting information, but also interpreting content and understanding all the metadata and all the technologies that are around us. So I think that's an area where we are meeting the challenges of this new age. And I do want to quote Ken Haycock, who was a former director of SLACE. He said that in library schools, we are not educating people to work in libraries, rather we are teaching them to focus on their knowledge, skills, and abilities. Where they end up working is incidental. So I think we are sort of seeing that kind of shift in terms of where we end up in terms of our skills in the new world of libraries. And the final point about sort of the new jobs, there are new functions now being added to library work. And I do want to mention that the past year, I've staffed a Director of Communications position for the library. Linda is not a librarian, but she certainly has the skills that we look for in terms of not only communications and marketing, but also in thinking about library issues and organizing information. I just didn't think we could do communications and marketing as librarians off the side of our desks. It needed a focus. It needed somebody to really take charge of that. And the other new position I established was the Director of Digital Initiatives, Alan Bell. And he also talks about the future of libraries, and he says if there is a future, it is in the digital realm, and that's another really strong message to make to all of you, that this is something that we need to take into account every day, because this is where the future is for libraries. Some of those positions that I just mentioned come from the library strategic plan, which I initiated when I arrived. Things like collections in a digital age, enhancing learning and research and community engagement, they're all parts of that strategic plan, but they all show sort of the direction of UBC Library and others in those that we deal with. The core services, though, you know, the reference services, the technical services, IT, borrower services, things we do as librarians all the time, they're still there, and they still are the core services. We are looking at them to see how to make them more cost-effective, how they serve users, because user needs are changing. How do they continue to serve users? So they are being reviewed, but as I said, they're still the basis of what we do in a library. And the final sort of part of a library that I think is really growing in terms of importance is the whole notion of assessment. You know, sometimes we think it's a luxury just to sort of assess what we do, how well we do it, but it's become critical in this day and age. I'm a member of an ARL statistical task force looking at statistics, and we realize that, you know, we're just gathering numbers. We're just saying how much we output, how many items in your collection. That is no longer valid. What's valid is what's the impact of what you do in a library? How have you made your users become successful? What have you done to do that? That's what we want to measure, and that's what we're trying to do, but that's not easy. It's easy to count numbers. It's not easy to count what impact you've had or what influence you have had as a librarian on your users. So that's an area that is becoming much more important and much more active if you read the literature. Okay, so from that sort of perspective of libraries, I want to turn to convergence. As I said to the students, my former institution, the National Library, merged with the National Archives in Ottawa in 2004. There were many reasons for it. It was a real physical convergence. To me, that's what radical convergence. It's physical. There are many types of convergence. But that one happened for good or for bad. There were good things about it, and there were not so good things about it. But as libraries and other cultural institutions, I really think we need to talk about convergence and collaboration more and more. And convergence, as you know, is I think it's on a continuum. You start with contact, and then you cooperate with somebody, and then you might collaborate with somebody, and then you might even converge with somebody. That OCLC report, if you remember, that called Silence of the Lambs, or Silos of the Lambs, sorry. The Silos of the Lambs. And lambs are, of course, libraries, archives, and museums. That really is a way of showing how we are becoming more alike and how we are cooperating more. And just briefly, I just want to show you that's okay. The story I sometimes tell about convergence, and this has to do with Captain James Cook's voyage around the world in 1775. He took with him two scientists, a father and a son, Georg Forster, I think, and his son, also called Georg. And when they came to the New World, they picked up all sorts of things like this, artifacts and cultural things and books and manuscripts and everything that they found here in the New World. They took it all back to, of course, back to England. And when they got there, they decided they would just spread it out and just give it away. And some of it went to museums and some of it went to private people. And when the Georgs were invited for dinner, you know, he'd bring along a little gift for his hostess and give her a shell or something. And, you know, that collective sense of that history was just dispersed. It was lost. Those artifacts, it would be very hard to find again, those artifacts that they found in one place here, now spread out amongst many countries probably in the world. And so I think that sort of illustrates what we're trying to do in terms of converging information and bringing back that historical sense of things that were together before. And you can only do that through digital technologies. And perhaps if they exist in different collections, digitize them, put them in a common portal, and you've got sort of better access to that time in the 1775 when things were together. What did it look like? And I think with the technologies, in terms of converging that information, that is now possible when it wasn't possible before. So I think libraries around the globe, and I've traveled a lot and saw a lot of libraries working together, they are collaborating. There's many, many projects I could tell you about where we are working together to provide better access to our users, because in effect, the users don't care where the information is. It could be in this country or that country. It could be in a local archive. It could be in a public museum. They don't care where it is. They just, I think, want access to all that information. So we're collaborating more and more in terms of how to bring all that information together. And I think that's where it's not just, I guess, serving the user better. It's also collaboration allows us to do more things and to reach a wider audience as well. And I think we're all interested in doing that. I don't think that the professions will converge, if I can say that. They have similar mandates. Libraries, archives, museums, we all have mandates to collect, describe, provide access to information, have our users, preserve information. And certainly through digital means now we can do that a lot better, but it doesn't mean that we all need to, you know, become one physical entity or merge together. I think even the technologies are converging though, and that helps us with what we do. If you think about, you know, cloud computing and mobile devices, they're different technologies, but they are converging to help us provide that access that we want to give. Digital libraries are proliferating, and you know, the user community is growing at a great rate. So all of that combines together so that that vast amount of information I mentioned is available to everyone around the world. And if I could just give you a few examples, I'll just put up a few of some of these collaborative projects that exist to show what this is all about. You may have heard about Project Neptune, which is the Northeast Pacific underwater data collection experiments taking place. It's a huge project, 25 years, and it's a collaboration of many universities in the area, but also across Canada and around the globe. And all kinds of data are being created through this joint project, and that data is going to be collected together and made sure that it stays together and is available to all the people that need access to it over time. And so many of the people involved in this project are data managers, they're librarians, and data curators are working on it as well. So I think this example really is something that shows the collaboration possibilities, but also why, you know, library skills are needed. The other project, this one is a bit closer to home in the sense of librarianship. This is a project Canadian Association of Research Libraries, or CARL, is now initiating, called the Canadian National Collaborative Data Infrastructure Project. Data is the new commodity. data, how do you manage all that data that's being produced? You know, libraries look at published information, archives looks at manuscripts, papers, collections of material. But the data that is generated to produce some of those things, who's looking after that? And I think this effort by Carl recognizes how together we need to find a solution. And we're trying to get funding from CFI, the Canadian Foundation, or the Canada Foundation for Innovation, to develop a national infrastructure to deal with data. It doesn't sound very sexy, I know. You know, data, well, it's the stuff, the bits and bytes, and the, you know, all the statistical tables and everything, but it really is the basis of the information that we need, and it's going to be managed over its whole life cycle. So let's hope that we get some funding from CFI. And when I talk about funding, I don't mean like, you know, $50,000. This is a $50 million project. And that's the type of money that we're asking for from CFI. Another project I could mention is the one just down the road here, the Museum of Anthropology. They've just launched this online resource called the Reciprocal Research Network that links about 300,000 objects related to First Nations. And it's not just First Nations in this area. This is a partnership with prestigious organizations like Cambridge, Oxford, the Smithsonian, all linked together through a website. And again, it brings together museums, libraries, archives, and it really is a good example of this type of collaboration to preserve and to provide access to our cultural heritage. This one focusing on, of course, our Aboriginal communities. And it's not just technically a project, it also deals with the sensitivities of dealing with First Nations and respecting their cultural heritage. And the First Nations who are involved, you know, they, through this project, now see things that they were, or their ancestors were involved in, but were scattered around the world and they could never see, and now they can through digital means and have access to their joint heritage. So I think this is really a great project. And my last example deals with IFLA. And as some of you know, I'm the incoming president of IFLA, which is the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. And we have also just developed a strategic plan, and we have a vision of being that trusted voice of libraries at the global level. And we have some key activities. I won't tell you about those, perhaps just one or two. But the first one really is about digital and how will libraries at a global level deal with digital information. So a lot of work is being done in that area. And another way that IFLA supports its memberships is through developing standards, of course, but also manifestos. So now this sounds pretty techie stuff in the sense of, you know, international work. A lot of things happen through treaties and manifestos, and IFLA develops manifestos for libraries, which are really lobbying instruments that countries can use. Libraries can use in various countries to lobby their own governments. And one of the manifestos is one on digital libraries. And it's being officially endorsed by UNESCO. It takes a couple of years to do that, but we hope it will be endorsed. And it is something that libraries around the world do ask for, that there's an official position, a global position on behalf of libraries, that libraries in developing countries, for example, can take that and go to their government and say, look, this is what we need to do with digital libraries. We need your support, and let's do something about it. So I think the manifestos are really quite effective. And in terms of convergence, IFLA too has initiated a joint committee with ICA and with ICOM, so the international NGOs looking at archives and museums, to look at convergence, to look at joint collaborations, and to do some joint lobbying, because, you know, at the international level, it's really hard to move forward with lobbying, for example, UNESCO or WIPO or the United Nations or IFRO. There's so many organizations that we need to lobby, and we can do it better if we do it together rather than doing it individually, because our needs are really quite similar. And one really successful story is around copyright. Copyright is a national thing. I mean, we have our copyright law. Every country has a copyright law. At the international level, we can, though, lobby those big organizations like WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, to take into account the needs of libraries. Because limitations and exceptions for educational purposes, if we can get that approved at the international level, then every country can also say, well, it's approved there. It does make sense perhaps to do it at a national level. So there's some great linkages that we can make there. Okay, so, and finally, I think the last trend I want to touch on briefly is how are we changing as libraries and as librarians, and how are we perceived by users and by librarians in the 21st century? We've all heard the stories of, well, people will always go to a reference desk if they have a question, or they'll, if we build it, they will come. They're not coming anymore just because we're there and we think we offer good services. People have changed. They have their own needs of how they look for information. But I do want to tell you that in 2005, OCLC did a study of perceptions of libraries, and they asked about, well, several thousand Americans from all walks of life, when you hear the word library, what do you think of? What word do you think of? And the answer was book. Right? Last year, 2010, they asked the same question of many Americans again. And so what do you think they picked? When you think of the word library, in 2010, people again predominantly said book. There's still that perception that libraries are associated with books, and which is good. I'm not saying it's not, but I think that libraries have changed so much and are doing so many different things that I think we do have a challenge to sell that message that we're not only about books, we're about information, we're about self-use of material. You don't have to come to libraries. You can use it from your desktop. You can use resources from wherever you are. So it is a perception, and I think we're all trying to deal with that. And then if I go back 2,000 years to the Library of Alexandria, gathering and safeguarding all these manuscripts, I don't think they did a good job in safeguarding it 2,000 years ago since it disappeared. But that focus has changed. We are now what I call living labs. I think libraries with technology are experimenting, trying different things, and promoting different ways to access information. And information is going to be more and more reused and recycled. Those are words that are coming up a lot when you do scenario planning. In the future, how is it going to look? You're going to access information, you're going to manipulate it, you're going to reuse it, recycle it, create new information, preserve that information. It again gets accessed and reused and recycled. So there's this constant change in terms of how we deal with information and how we're using information. And I think that libraries have a tremendous role in that to be a part of that. We hear of the word consumer. There's also a word called prosumer, which kind of is a hybrid thing because users are not just using information, they're also creating content at the same time. And there is this, I think that comes from, Tom Evans, this idea of the prosumer. We've all shared emails. Most of us have tweeted. We've shared links on Facebook, or we've sent a ping. And when I heard the word ping, my first thought was, that winery in the Okanagan, see you later. It's got a wine called Ping, and I thought, oh well, this is not the same Ping though. But it's this whole area of getting information together, reusing it, sending it, receiving it, creating new thoughts around it. So in conclusion then, I think, if we focus on our personal and our professional competencies, I think we are up to the challenge of meeting these new developments that we see in terms of users and technologies. Digitization and digital is a key factor in our future. Collaboration, convergence. We have to take the unique skills of all the professions, of archivists and curators and librarians, and come towards an understanding of how to deal with this challenge of all that information. And finally, in terms of the sort of perceptions of librarians and libraries, I've got a map in my office of the world, but it's from the Tokugawa era, which shows Japan is at the center of the world. And I think this convergence of understanding of different points of view is really important in how we approach our information needs. It doesn't matter from what perspective you come from. The collaboration idea of gaining those new perspectives is so important if we really want to work together. The intercultural understanding too, and I think that comes from Place and Promise that we've seen at UBC and elsewhere. It's all related to convergence of understanding of how we work together. And the international librarianship is a way to do that. I think, did I understand correctly, you have a Libraries Beyond Borders here chapter? That's wonderful. I would encourage you to participate more in activities like that. You gain an understanding of how things are elsewhere, but you also can contribute to that understanding. And I have a colleague, Jesus, from Mexico. He doesn't have much money, but he does manage to get to a lot of international work, and he certainly finds it very rewarding in what he does. And in IFLA, too, I just want to mention we will be developing a program for international librarianship to identify around the world some key people who are interested in that, and then we could have a kind of an education component or a development component around that. So I think that in general, this openness to collaboration and convergence and moving forward together in a global world where information is available in so many ways and from so many people, I think we're really well placed to make a mark and to make a difference. So thank you very much for that. And there it is. That's the last word. So thank you, and I'd be very happy to engage in some dialogue or questions. Oh, and this is typical for librarians. There has to be a reading list and